Good morning, everyone, and especially good morning to Professor Shad. It is my pleasure today to welcome our Tun Hussein Onn chair holder, Professor Shad, and today in this wonderful Friday morning, he will be giving us his insights into the issue of gender equality from the perspective of the Constitution and the laws. I feel that it is a very timely topic indeed, a topic that is not widely discussed in Malaysia enough in our public discourse. Just to highlight, the SDG aims to reduce inequality as a whole, and this has been set as its goal number 10. But more importantly, the SDG aims to reduce gender inequality. And this is, again, is highlighted by our goal, the goal number 5. Just a bit of a background. During my field work recently in Jili Kelantan and Sempurna Sabah, we found that women most of the time face additional issues apart from the issues shared within a community. These issues include family planning, women's hygiene, and also children's malnourishment, among others. At the workplace, we find that some women may face issues such as discrimination, sexual harassments, verbal assaults, wage inequality, among others. With all of these challenges posed in different settings within our society, we need to pose the question whether the laws which have been created were able to protect women's rights in Malaysia sufficiently and properly. Most importantly, are these laws executed and also implemented well on the ground to protect women's rights in Malaysia? So before I pass the floor to our very renowned speaker, let me just highlight how the session will go. We will open the Q&A session after our presentation from Professor Shad. I will be co-moderating this session with our lovely colleague, Ms. Iza, who will be looking through questions in the chat boxes. So if you are interested to directly ask questions to Professor Shad, please use the raised hand function in your Zoom app. And if not, you can always write down those questions. And again, because this is such a very interesting and a very timely, and to some, a very sensitive issue, let me just remind all of us that we are all learning from each other. And with that note, let us have a very constructive and also a very peaceful and harmonious discussion moving forward. Thank you, Professor Shad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Juita, Ms. Iza, Tunku Sheila, Encik Ali, Shahir. It's my great privilege to be with you and our audience. And the topic, of course, is very, very important, not just for us as citizens, but all of us as members of a civilization. Let me begin by saying that gender equality is part of the broader mosaic of human rights, and any strides towards this ideal must be supported and celebrated. However, the existentialist reality here and everywhere is that through much of history, discrimination against and exploitation of women have been a shameful reality. Kings and emperors have kept harems. Infanticide, especially of girls, was known to many societies. Grown-up daughters were often given away to temples as devdasis, servants of God. When widows were burnt on the pyres of their deceased husbands till the 1930s. Genital mutilation, child marriage, polygamy, unilateral divorce were and are persistent. Prostitution, sex slavery, trafficking in women, and the abuse of the female form in the media, in advertising, and in sports are profitable aspects of the national economy. Though the tide of equality is lapping at our shores, sadly there are many constitutional, legal, religious, cultural, and economic structures that act as dikes against this surging tide. The quest for gender equality must therefore be waged at many fronts. In some areas, great strides have indeed been made, but of course more needs to be done. This is a journey and not a destination. I have to, however, say with sadness that in many areas, Malaysian Muslims have regressed quite badly since the 80s. All in all, we are all witnesses to a new movement in history, and it is up to us to be bystanders, or participants in this civilizational advance. I hope to highlight for you 4 things. Number 1, the many strides that have been made in our quest for gender equality in our constitution and laws and in administrative practice. Number 2, some of the flaws that remain in our laws. Number 3, the structural and societal factors that impede progress and that are not much talked about. And number 4, what needs to be done. May I begin by pointing out that Malaysia has ratified many important international instruments on gender equality, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, then CEDAW, or the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. But I'm sad to report to you that international law, all international law, is not automatically part of our corpus juris, of our body of law. It needs to be given the kiss of life by our own legislation. So international law is not self-executing. We remain wedded to the dualist theory of law. International law is one thing and domestic law is another. Nevertheless, it's good that we have ratified CEDAW, though with lots of reservations to permit us to indulge in, may I say, differentiation. It's a polite word for discrimination. Differentiation in the area of personal laws. And by the way, personal laws not only of Muslims. In Sabah Sarawak, the personal laws of the natives allow a great deal of discrimination as well. Now I come to the federal constitution. In the federal constitution, there is equality before the law under Article 8, Clause 1. The constitution says all persons are equal before the law and entitled to the equal protection of the law. I have to report to you with sadness that regrettably, Article 8, Clause 1 remains one of the least utilized provisions of the Constitution, though it was meant to be a catalyst for constitutional development. In 2001, our Constitution was enhanced further by amending Article 8, Clause 2 to outlaw discrimination on the ground of gender, but not in all fields, only in some fields. There were 5 fields where discrimination was not permitted. One of them is employment with a public authority. And we have a good case on this point. Noor Fadila Ahmad Saikin, a trainee teacher, became pregnant and she was dismissed. She went to the court and she said that's discrimination on grounds of gender, and she won her case because she was working in the public sector. But I'm going to report to you with sadness that the same consideration by the courts was not given to a lady, an air hostess, who was working for the so-called private sector. The court said mass is private sector, so she could be dismissed on the ground that she got pregnant too many times. May I also point out to you that Schedule 9, List 3, next slide, allows for federal and state governments to make laws on social welfare, social services, protection of women, children, and young persons. And Again, this is an underutilized provision. May I skip 2 slides? May I go to some advances? Next one. Next. Yes, some advances toward gender equality. Women constitute nearly 60% or more of our workforce. The Chief Justice today, the President of the Court of Appeal are women. In recent memory, the Anti-Corruption Chief, the head of the National Bank, and the Deputy Prime Minister were women. We have had women Vice Chancellors, though their numbers is not rising. In fact, the numbers is going down. The Employment Act requires maternity leave in most sectors, not all, most sectors. Even fathers are eligible for a few days of paternity leave. There is prohibition for night work and underground work for women. Family law, non-Muslim family law, but sadly not Muslim family law, has evolved significantly towards equal treatment. I have to report this with happiness for non-Muslims. Their family law does not discriminate on the issues of, let us say, monogamy or polygamy or inheritance, equal rights. Though, of course, in other areas, women remain in many adverse circumstances. But in non-Muslim family law, great strides have been made. The Penal Code has been amended repeatedly in the last few decades to take note of feminist thinking on issues of rape and abortion. At one time in the law of rape, if a woman had been raped, the defense lawyer could bring to the court her entire sexual history to prove that she was a woman of loose virtue. So the joke used to be that first of all she got raped by the rapist, then she got raped by the rapist's lawyer in the court because he just dragged her through the mud. Fortunately now, that is all in the past. Now, the victim's sexual history with others is not admissible, but still her history with the rapist is still admissible. And I don't think that's fair, because a couple may have had a relationship, but once she says it stops, it should stop. It's not a defense for him to say that we were lovers. So the law has made some advances, but I think we need to continue with more fairness. The Domestic Violence Act and the Penal Code provide protection against violence in the home. And I have to say this to you, that there was a great battle to apply this law to Muslim women, because a number of quote, religious people, unquote, were saying that in religious law, a man is allowed to beat his wife. May I point out that criminal law is in federal hands. Not all aspects of Islamic law are in state hands, not all aspects. Only 25 topics, mostly of Muslim family law, are in state hands. Criminal law is in federal hands. And may I point out to you, Article 11, Clause 5 says that the freedom of religion can be restricted on grounds of public order, public health, and morality. So domestic violence can be banned for all citizens on the ground of morality. Article 11, Clause 5. Policies and practices. At the policy level, the government is officially committed to the third millennium development goal to empower women. A federal cabinet post oversees women's affairs. How I pray to God that this portfolio could do a little bit of a better job in protecting women. For example, the last few years there was issues about child marriage, and I don't think much was accomplished. The country invests heavily in education, and back in 2010, female literacy rate, I'm told, was 91%. In some parts of the country, train, bus, and taxi services incorporate features to prevent sexual harassment. However, very, very sad to report, there are lots of permissible departures from the ideal and the dream of equality before the law and equal protection of the law. Article 3 on Islam And Schedule 9, List 2, Paragraph 1 of the Federal Constitution, they provide that Islam is the religion of the Federation, and Schedule 9 empowers all state assemblies to pass laws on Muslim personal laws. Now, many aspects of Muslim personal law are less favorable to women. There's no point in denying this reality. Polygamy, arbitrary divorce by men, unequal shares in the law of inheritance. In this area, the sacrosanct and cherished provisions of religion and custom come face to face with the contemporary demand for gender parity. No one really knows how this intractable dilemma must be resolved. I'll have something more to say of this later on. I do believe that actually solutions are possible, enlightened solutions are possible. Then there is Article 8, Clause 5, and this is perhaps the most controversial one. It permits departures from equality in the matter of personal laws. Quote is personal laws. This departure applies not only to Muslims, but to all other communities, for example, to the natives in Sabah and Sarawak. However, I beg to submit that discrimination is allowed only for personal laws and is not permitted in other areas, but such discrimination is pervasive. For example, it would be unconstitutional in my view to discriminate against women in such matters as appointment to the post of Sharia judges. That's not personal law, Sharia judges. Or the discriminatory criminalization of beauty contests. Please don't get me wrong, I'm not favoring beauty contests, but what I am objecting to is that in Selangor there is a law, girls taking part in beauty contests are guilty of a criminal offense. But men taking part in bodybuilding contests are not punished similarly. The rules of awrat apply to both males and females, and as such, if the law punishes women, it must punish the men equally. Article 8, Clause 1. Likewise, discrimination against men, but not against women for cross-dressing is constitutionally permissible. I'm sorry to report that there have been cases on this point, and our civil courts have turned the other way, refused to give remedies to men who are singled out, cross-dressing men who are singled out, even though many of them brought evidence to the court that they were suffering from GID, gender identity disorder, which is not voluntary, which is not curable, which is something that they were born with. Article 8, Clause 5 on permissible discrimination, in my view, must be read along with Article 11, Clause 5, which says that freedom of religion does not permit anything contrary to public order, health, or morality. So what I'm humbly suggesting to all our listeners is this: a constitutional provision must not be read in isolation. It must be read holistically in the light of all other provisions. So though Article 8, Clause 5 permits differentiation in the matter of personal laws, Article 8, Clause 5 should not stand alone. It must be read along with 11, Clause 5, which says freedom of religion does not permit discrimination on grounds of order, public health, or morality. In my view, there is tremendous potential in 11, Clause 5 to ban or regulate the practice of child marriage. Why? Child marriage is an issue of health. It's an issue of morality. It's actually, in my view, basically a case of sex slavery. You send a 10, 11, 12-year-old girl into marriage, basically you are committing her to a life of sex slavery in her early days. So whether it is genital mutilation, dowry taking, or polygamy, or arbitrary and unilateral divorce, I think it can be regulated on the ground of Article 11, Clause 5, that is public order, public health, and morality. Citizenship. In citizenship of children, discrimination on grounds of gender is quite widespread. Articles 14, 15, 24, 26, and Part 3 emphasize the father's citizenship or residence. The mother's status does not matter. Permanent residence. In law related to permanent residence for a spouse, there is discrimination against Malaysian females with foreign spouses. So if a Malaysian female were to take a foreign spouse, he is not entitled to permanent residence or to citizenship after 2 years. So it looks like it's discrimination against a foreign male. Actually, it works against the local woman. On the other hand, if a Malaysian man were to take a foreign wife, the constitution says after 2 years, she's entitled to citizenship. Entitled to citizenship. So basically, Malaysian males are welcome to take foreign women as their wives, but Malaysian women are discouraged from taking foreign men. It's discrimination against women, actually. Though it appears to be against men, it's against Malaysian women. In citizenship for children, I mentioned that, sorry. Natives, in Article 161, Clause 6, the status of a native of Sabah is dependent on descent from the father. And I can't understand that. Why is the mother less important than the father in terms of native status? Illegitimate children, when it comes to, now here see the hypocrisy here. When it comes to citizenship, the father is more important. But when it comes to the citizenship of an illegitimate child, the mother suddenly becomes more important. The reason for that is that in most of these cases, what had happened was a Malaysian male got involved with a foreign domestic servant or a foreign worker, then she gave birth, the child is illegitimate, and the child gets citizenship from the mother, from the foreign mother, rather than from the defaulting father who was a Malaysian. So the law is unfair. Now, I want to point out something that many of my colleagues may not agree with me. Throughout our criminal law, for that matter, throughout our legal system, there are what could be called structural problems, by which I mean that the law appears to be fair and equal, but actually it is built on sexist presumptions. It is built on ideas which reflect male thinking. For example, provocation is a defense in criminal law, provided it was immediate. If a time has lapsed, then it is too late for provocation. But many women's advocates have pointed out that this requirement of immediacy is a male way of thinking, male psychology. Women often react to abuse in a delayed manner. But by the time they react, it is too late for the law of private defense. For example, there was an American case. Fortunately, the courts reversed long-standing prejudices in the law. This man had been abusing his wife for a long, long time. One day he came back home drunk. He abused her. Then he fell asleep. While he was asleep, she went to the kitchen, brought a knife, and she mutilated him. So she was prosecuted. Her lawyer said, private defense. The prosecutor said, what private defense? He's asleep. He's drunk and he's asleep. There's no question of private defense. But the judge said, no. For the first time in American history, the judge said, there is still provocation, because women react to provocation in a different way than men. I think we need to learn from American jurisprudence on this. So this is a structural issue. The law of provocation reflects male psychology. Enticement. In the law of enticement, section 498, it is an offense to entice or take away a married woman. But there is no provision to punish a woman who entices a married man. So the law is a little bit in this situation. It's patronizing towards women, but it's also discriminatory against men. The law of rape allows defense lawyers to raise evidence about the rapist's sexual history
with the accused. And may I point out something else to you, which is very, very shameful. I apologize, but it's very important. The way the concept of rape is defined. Rape is penetration by the male organ into the female organ. That is rape. If a man uses other objects, that's not rape. And there was a very sad case in Sarawak where a 42-year-old man impregnated a 16-year-old girl. She even delivered a child. Now, what more evidence do you need? But his lawyer cleverly argued that he didn't penetrate her. Instead, he used his fingers. He was touching her, he was touching himself, and that's how she got pregnant. He was found not guilty of statutory rape. Why? Because the definition says it must be the male organ, etc. We need to change that. People who denigrate women, brutalize women by using other objects should surely be guilty of the crime of rape. However, there is some discrimination here about male and female. Under section 375, girls aged 16 and below are rightly incapable of consent for sex, so that will be statutory rape. However, there is no law about rape of boys. Boys too can be raped. May I move on to the next slide, gender discrimination? Yes, thank you. I'm sad to report to you, the private sector is full of gender discrimination. And the courts in Beatrice Fernandez versus System Penerbangan have said that the dismissal of an air hostess because she became pregnant was upheld because the constitutional protection applies only to the public sector, not to the private sector. Next slide. I humbly submit that the decision in Beatrice Fernandez is not only shameful, it is a clear error of jurisprudence. The court proceeded on the assumption that the shade of the Constitution is only for the public sector. Come on, that is seriously in error. Slavery can exist in the private sector and in the public sector. Domestic violence can exist in the private sector and in the public sector. Surely, if there is a constitution, its protection must apply across the board. So I totally disagree with the Beatrice Fernandez decision that constitutional law is basically meant to protect people against the power of the state. I disagree with it for another reason, and that is this. It is naive to suppose that human rights are violated only in the public sector. There is as much, if not more, violation of human rights in the private sector. For example, domestic servants are violated repeatedly. They have no rights. That's in the private sector. It's not in the public sector. May I move on? Domestic servants, I mentioned that. Cross-genders. Many Sharia laws criminalize cross-dressing. Males are singled out. Their treatment by the police and by the Sharia authorities raises many issues of due process, right to privacy, equality, and other constitutional rights. Then, may I point out now, along with the law, there are socio-political realities that perpetuate inequality. There is a problem of formal versus functional equality. The law can give formal equality, but functional equality is something different. You know, we must evaluate law not by reference to what it says, but by reference to what it does. Not what it is, but what its consequences are. Not the form, but the functioning. Not the content, but the consequences. So that's the formal versus functional equality. I'm sad to report to you that despite the equal right to vote and to seek political office, Of the 222 MPs in our Dewan Rakyat, only 33 or 14.86% of the MPs are women. In the federal cabinet, state executive councils, the civil service, less than 20% of decision-making posts are filled by women. This is despite the fact that women constitute about 60% of the workforce, though mostly at the middle and lower rungs. In the corporate sector, GLCs and statutory bodies, a similar pattern of underrepresentation exists. Now, I'm a teacher. I've noticed that in the universities, girls do very well on the roll of honors in terms of results. Class 1 upper or class 2 upper. But when it comes to jobs, girls are mostly at the middle and lower rungs of our workforce. So what should be done? I'm not so sure about that. Some people say quotas are the solution. In many Scandinavian countries, that's what the government has done. They have told employers, you have either you put a quota of 30% for women, or we change the law. And actually in Scandinavian countries, without change of law, such quotas are observed. But of course, quotas have their own problem. Once you have a quota, it creates the impression that there is a crutch. Some people need crutches, and therefore you need to give them a quota. So that's a bigger issue. Equal pay. I want to mention this to you, Madam Chairperson. We have achieved a lot in terms of equal pay. But it is correctly pointed out that female-dominated vocations are deliberately allocated low salaries. So the call today is not just equal pay for equal work, but equal pay for equal work of equal value. For example, why is a nurse paid lesser than an excavator driver? Why? It's because nurses are mostly women and excavator drivers are mostly men. But in terms of value to society, in what way is a nurse of lesser importance than an excavator driver? However, I have to confess to you that equal pay for equal work of equal value has massive economic implications. Child marriages are very common. I mentioned earlier, we can regulate them on grounds of 11 clause 5 if political will was not lacking. Sexual harassment, Madam Chairperson pointed out, yes indeed, it's widespread. Rape remains a serious problem. Cultural religious prejudices are rampant. In some, next slide, in some everywhere in the world, a wide gap exists between the law in the book and the social, cultural, religious, and economic realities on the ground. I confess that legal provisions are necessary, but they are not enough. They do not significantly dent pervasive patterns of bias and oppression. The Constitution can confer legal and formal equality, but functional equality in any outcome is more difficult. So what's the way forward? There are no simple solutions. The UN Women Annual Report puts forward a very perceptive and broad-based plan for gender equality and female empowerment. It reiterates the following: the need for increasing women's leadership and participation. I can say this, some of the best well-administered countries today have women prime ministers. Whether it is Germany, whether it is New Zealand, I think that's something that men must admit, they're doing a good job. Ending violence against females is of course very important. Enhancing women's economic empowerment, proposing engagement of women in all aspects of peace and security. I don't know if any Secretary General of the UN has been a female. None, none up to now. Have been female, yes. For some reason, no defense minister in our part of the world has been a woman, because I suppose women cannot handle defense. That's the assumption, but
Yeah,
For a time, Australia did actually have a defense minister, maybe Spain. Yeah.
I see, wonderful. Actually, in Scandinavian countries, they've had defense minister as a woman, but in Asia and Africa, I think there's a problem of stereotyping. Proposing engagement of women in all aspects of peace and security, that's very important. I think there'll be more peace. I hope so. I believe so. If women were in leadership positions, making gender equality central to national development planning and budgeting. But many dilemmas remain. One dilemma is this, and I really don't know what the answer here is. Do we need equal rights or do we need separate rights? In some areas, equal rights may basically mean that women will have to behave like men. May I also point out, it often works unfairly to have equal rights. So let's face the realities. I get up in the morning, I get dressed, breakfast is ready on the table, clothes are hanging on the hanger there, I get dressed, I drive off. Most women can't do that. They get up in the morning, they have to take care of the children, they have to take care of the spouse, they have to take care of the kitchen. But there is equal clocking in and clocking out. So it's very equal. I clock in at this time, you clock in at that time. But the reality is that actually cultural, religious norms are such that women are burdened with greater responsibilities. So perhaps there should be flexi clocking hours to take note of the realities of life. So this is the big dilemma, equal rights or separate rights. Differential treatment, however, perpetuates negative perceptions. Okay, then work of equal value, I mentioned that earlier. Maybe it's not enough to give equal pay for equal work. It should be equal work, equal pay for equal work of equal value. And something even more controversial, education is not enough. We need empowerment. I'm sorry to report to you that though education is one of the keys to self-respect, independence and empowerment, in much of Africa and Asia, there are lots of women educated and unemployed. Because in the workforce, they don't hire women in some sectors. Even in Malaysia, for example, in the engineering sector, women are underrepresented. When people employ engineers, they don't want women, especially field work is involved. So what is more important then is, besides education, paid work and employment. Educationists are recommending that polytechnics and universities must restructure their programs to create self-employed entrepreneurs who will create jobs and not join the mass of unemployed graduates. At the moment, the aim is to train students so that they can get a job. I think we need to train students to create jobs and to be self-employed. Dignity versus rights, even more controversial. Freedom and autonomy are important nourishments for the soul. Yet it is also true that exercise of some rights can diminish our dignity, perpetuate prejudices, and entrench sexist views. The hedonistic, sex-laced culture run by men that pervades modern civilization denigrates women in scores of ways. The fashion, cosmetics, film, TV, next slide, and advertisement industries sexualize women. Females are depicted as mere objects of sexual desire and as frivolous and gullible beings. Beauty pageants, sports events, and cheerleading squads do the same. Even girls in their early teens are not spared. Sex sells well. I live near Mega Mall. There's a tailor shop for alterations. It has a sign outside. If you have it, flout it. So I think this sexualization of every aspect of women's life is something that certainly prevents dignity prostitution thrives and its peddlers are now anointed with the status of sex workers. Now, I have to say this, as long as there is prostitution, there'll be trafficking in women. Because it's a lucrative business, international business. Pornography pervades society. The internet has worsened things. Pornography demeans women more than it demeans men. Maybe I'm wrong there, but that's my view. I think the women's rights movement that takes a principled stand against pervasive exploitation of women by men should take a similar moral stand against the overly liberal use of personal autonomy by some of their kind. May I humbly suggest, it's not always right to use our rights. In countries like Bangladesh and Thailand, there are demands for the fundamental rights of sex workers. Women leaders need to be reminded that many of the tendencies of modern culture contribute to the denigration of the entire female race. It must be realized that liberal society's moral laxity is and will remain fatal to women's dignity. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying women must all hide behind burqa. What I'm saying is the over-sexualization. For example, in sports, whether it's tennis or beach ball or gymnastics, there's over-sexualization of the female form. By way of conclusion, I want to say that gender bias cannot be exterminated by recourse to the law alone. We need to put our heads together to see how our patriarchal past can accommodate the contemporary demand for equality and dignity. The panorama of possibilities is vast if we listen to each other with open hearts, something that you cautioned everyone. Can I go to the next slide? Religion. We all recognize that religion is an important and powerful force in human civilization. And I want to say this, Madam Chairperson, that I do not believe that religion has caused any more harm than politics or economics or tribal or racial feelings. I think there is much that is good in religion and there is much that can be exploited. My humble view is this, that all religions, and I speak especially about Islam, all religions are a mansion with many rooms. There is scope for diversity. The only problem is that at this particular moment in our history in Malaysia, diversity is snuffed out. We're not allowed to speak about Islam or about movements in Islam, progressive movements in Islam, unless you have a tawliya from the Sharia authorities. What is the harm if people respectfully offer alternative views of how other Muslim societies are tackling some of the problems that are coming to the fore? For example, Tunisia at one time banned polygamy on the ground that the overall spirit is treat them equally. And it is impossible to treat them equally. Therefore, Tunisia says no polygamy. In India and Pakistan at one time, triple talaq, talaq tiga, was regarded by the court as single if it is on the same occasion. They say no, triple must be on 3 separate occasions. In Malaysia itself in the 70s, polygamy was not allowed unless you got permission from the court, and the court must investigate first. Sadly, in the 80s and 90s, we suffered a regression. Our Malaysian Muslim family law was one of the finer laws in Asia and Africa. Now we are one of the worst because we have regressed. We have regressed because we are not allowing Muslim brothers and sisters, and I hope you'll agree with me. There are lots of brothers who are with you. Brothers and sisters, to talk about the possibilities of more progressive, accommodative of human rights versions of Islam. For example, I was mentioning to Madam Chairperson, inheritance law differentiates between male and female share. But there's nothing to prevent a Muslim from giving his or her property in their lifetime, by way of hiba or gifts. So there are progressive interpretations possible. A second thing is this. First one was that diversity is not being allowed. If it were allowed, I think we can make a lot of progress. Secondly, even where the laws are wholesome, there's a gap between theory and practice. Thirdly, Article 11, Clause 5 allows religion to be regulated on many grounds, including public order, public health, and morality. We have not utilized 11, Clause 5. And fourthly, many aspects of Malay Adat, like Negeri Sembilan Adat Perpati, many of the aspects of Malay Adat, like the way Muslim girls, Malay girls, keep their family name instead of adopting the name of their husbands. Many aspects of Malay Adat were actually conducive to greater women's dignity. So I think there is hope in every religion. There are doctrines, principles, and precepts that can serve either purpose, either to create oppression or to create emancipation. I wish to end on an optimistic note. Sociologists have observed that some aspects of ancient Malay culture gave women a relatively high status in Southeast Asia. Family structures did not always follow patriarchal patterns. Preference for male children was not widespread. Women played active economic roles. They maintained their family name even after marriage. This means that the future of gender equality in this country may depend as much on understanding our past as in drawing inspirational lessons from abroad. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Shad, for a very rich food for thought this Friday morning. My heart sank a bit when you highlighted the regression that that have been observed in the past few years. But at the same time, I am happy and hopeful that we have feminists like you to also address those issues and to put it forward so that we can embrace these issues and work together to find solutions in the medium to long term. So with that note, I will pass the floor to my co-moderator, Ms. Izzah, to just highlight the questions that we have for Prof. Shad. Thank you.
Hi, I'll be going through the questions. Do remember it's still open, so you can still type your questions in the Q&A box or actually just raise your hand. But do keep in mind, given the instance of time and everything, we may or may not go through all of them, so apologies in advance. I'm not going to ignore you. But also to address this one question first, on the topic of slides, we will upload them after this, and once Professor Shad goes through it and confirms everything's okay. So don't worry, it will come out on our website, do check back. So we do have someone who has raised their hand. We have Mary, which we will allow you to talk, and you can ask your question. Hold on, there you go. You're allowed, you can unmute yourself.
Are you giving me the floor? This is Mary Shanti. Yeah, you're giving me the floor?
Yes, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, all of you, and especially good morning to Professor Shad Faruqi. That was a very illuminating presentation that you made, very honest and truthful as well. Thank you so much. I just want to make a couple of points. I'm a former CEDAW committee member, and I'd like references on what is in the text, not only in the text of the CEDAW Convention about equality, but also the work of the committee, its concluding observations, its general recommendations, and its jurisprudence. It gives us many, many solutions. I take note of, Professor, the various initiatives proposed by UN Women. But what they have failed to say is that these solutions that they are proposing, various actions and initiatives, must also have the force of the law. If they remain as just an action plan, and which all of us have action plans in our country for women, it does not get priority, it is not compelling. The CEDAW committee in its general recommendation 28 on core obligations of the state have said that there has to be not only an action plan and a policy which operationalizes the principle of equality, whether it is in our constitution or whether it is even provisions of the CEDAW convention, must be enforced through a general law on equality in the country. In order to facilitate the full realization of the right to equality. And this is quite often referred to as a gender equality law. So there would be statutory guarantees supplementing the constitutional guarantee of equality. I am very happy to give credit to the previous Pakatan Harapan government that embarked on this initiative of drafting a gender equality law in consultation with many stakeholders, including women's rights groups. But now it is in limbo. It has not progressed once the government changed hands. So this statutory guarantee of a gender equality law not only puts in place some of the actions and initiatives, Professor, that you yourself mentioned, but it also puts in place administrative, budgetary, capacity building, creating a positive social environment, culture that is negative, eliminating culture that is negative. All of that has to be in the gender equality law and has the compelling force of the law. I won't elaborate more, but I just want to raise a couple of other points. And from your presentation, you had talked about the undue liberal stance of some individuals, especially women. You mentioned sex workers. And also perhaps you're mentioning the LGBTQ people. I just want to point out that when it comes to whether we want to call it sex workers or prostitution, I won't go into that debate. What we are asking for is that their human rights are not violated, that there is no abuse and violence against all of them, even against LGBTQ people. There is killing of transgender people. We cannot tolerate that. We cannot tolerate discrimination and abuse against any category of people because we see them as unacceptable. That's all I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Actually, a minefield of information from your side. Thank you so much. Very rich. I agree with you that action plan alone is not enough. We have to operationalize it, and our criterion of evaluation must not be just formal, it must be functional. Are things actually really working well? So I agree with you on that. However, as to your suggestion that we need a special law on equality, I have no objection to that. If there is a separate Equal Pay Act or Sex Discrimination Act, I have no objection. But please do bear in mind, Article 8, Clause 1 is the general law. In fact, it's not only a general law, it's a higher law. It's much better than in England. In England, there is no Supreme Constitution. So there is Equal Pay Act, Sex Discrimination Act, Race Relations Act, but these are ordinary laws. In Malaysia, there is even a higher Supreme Constitution, but I have no objection. But you yourself pointed out that law alone will not solve the problem. We need to bring about cultural, religious, and a change in other attitudes. And I think that's where the role of all of us is important. The law is not the only
force or factor in society. There are many other factors. Religion is one of them, culture. The press, the media, for example, can play a significant role. So I think all of us have to play a role. Each of us alone is nothing, but collectively we can make a lot of difference. Let's not forget that a river ultimately consists of millions of drops of water coming together, constituting a torrent of pressure. So I think that's what is needed. Now, on the issue of LGBT, the LGBT issue is partly, of course, cultural and religious. When it comes to ill treatment of LGBT people, for example, I've been told by some of them that often they are stripped, that in the police station, fun is made of their sexual organs. They are harassed. In one Court of Appeal case decided by Justice Hishamuddin, the LGBT people gave evidence that they are constantly picked up by the Sharia authorities. As such, they have lost their jobs because they can't report for work. So I think as human beings, like all other human beings, they have a right to privacy. They have a right to dignity. Nobody should brutalize them. But the problem of the LGBT movement, maybe I should not use the word problem, the dimension of the LGBT that is a little bit difficult to handle is this. Those who are suffering from GID, gender identity disorder, attitudes toward them maybe are more tolerant. But now the LGBT movement is going in the direction of LGBT++. In other words, it has now become not just an issue of GID, it has become an issue of autonomy. It's my choice. I want to identify myself as a woman. And there are other issues that are coming up, which I do not know how to resolve, but all that I know, problems are there. For example, males will undergo sex change operation, and then they want to compete in women's sports, cornering all the glory, cornering all the medals. And some women athletes saying, no, that's not fair. So I don't know how this problem should be resolved. There are men dressed as women who say, I identify as a woman. I want to use the female toilet. There have been cases of violence where actually a male tried to enter a female toilet because he says, I identify, that's my right. So I just want you to know, at this particular moment, I think we need to walk the middle path when it comes to cruelty or making fun of them or violating their privacy, raiding their houses, bothering about trivial things like how they dress. Dress is cultural. Fiji men wear what is it called? Is it skirts? Is it another word for it? The Scottish wear kilts. This is cultural. Absolutely, it's cultural. So there is no fixed way males should dress. I mean, the juba, girls wear juba, men wear juba. So I think we should leave people alone on the issue of clothing. I have no problem when someone wants to wear cosmetics. But when it comes to this issue of LGBT++, I just want to confess to you, I myself don't know how to handle this issue. The plus part. I don't know how to handle this issue when males want to use female toilets because they say, I identify, it is my right. There is a little bit of abuse of human rights, not just in this area, in many areas. I've had people in my constitutional law class asking me, say, it's my fundamental right to smoke. It's my right to smoke. So I say, yeah, it is your right to smoke, but please don't exhale. Please don't exhale because then once you exhale, then your smoke comes to me. So as I said during the talk, it's not always right to use our rights. And then please do bear in mind, religion and culture also are important. By the way, in some societies, the hunsas are fully recognized. There is no humiliation of them. In fact, in India, Pakistan, when there is a marriage, there will almost always be invitation to what they call the hijras, the hunsas, to come and perform dance and music. So I think we need to be, I'm all with you. The law must not treat anyone in a cruel and indignified way. Everyone must have human rights. Even if we disagree with someone's lifestyle or someone's views. I like the Christian saying, condemn the sin, but love the sinner. I think we must show respect for everyone. So we may not agree with their views. So I don't think you and I are very far apart, but I'm just trying to point out to you, I have some dilemmas here which I'm not able to resolve. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, we still have actually quite a lot of hands, so we'll try to get through this quickly. Sorry for the wait. Thanks again, Mary, for your question. So, Rita, we have a question from her, and I will.
Please read it out to me.
No, it's she wants to speak as well. So
you'll have to help me. I can't hear
Yeah.
so well, I think, because of the.
Okay, I'm with Rita already. We've been listening. Thank you, Prof. Shad. I promise I'll take only half a minute. Yeah, I'm with Rita already. I'm Dr. Narima, by the way. Hi, Prof. Shad.
Hello.
Hello. Prof. Shad, is Narima here? Before I ask you my question, Prof, I just want to remind you that Nirmala Sitharaman was the Defense Minister of India.
Okay, that's wonderful.
actually, it was a
Oh,
long
I'm
list.
sure you remember that.
I'm very happy, but in general, I think top posts,
Yeah.
top posts
Anyway,
are generally
Yeah,
given.
and
to
I just wanted to remind you that India did
good.
have a woman
I'm
defense
happy
minister.
to hear that.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you knew that. Okay.
India is 70 plus years old. It's good, at least they had at least one,
Yeah.
By 70
Yeah.
years old, okay?
Yes. Okay, Prof. Shad, I have a question. But before I go to my question, you began, and I became very disappointed when you mentioned that Article 8.1 is the least employed, the least utilized of the articles in the Federal Constitution. And I thought that was a very disappointing thing to know that is the least employed, least utilized article. The last few slides that you showed to us, you were very optimistic on the religion, and you said that, you know, there is hope in every religion. So you had a lot of optimism, but in between your many statements, your many PowerPoint slides in between, I can only say that there were more, I mean, you elaborated on the gaps and the needs, you know, and the shortfalls that we have. So that seems to be not that.
You lost you.
Can I unmute myself?
Yes, now I can.
Okay. And in between your pessimism and your optimism, I see a lot of problems. I was very pessimistic about there's so many gaps to cover now. And I will not be exaggerating if I say that, at least in Malaysia, religion, especially Islam, has played a major role in putting up these obstacles. So my question to you, Shad, is, if somebody asks you this question, Prof. Shad, what would your answer be? And this statement would be, many writers have said that Islam and justice are not compatible. How would you respond to that statement?
I would respond by saying they are perfectly compatible. Many Muslim societies actually have done a good job in elevating the status of women. 1400 years ago, actually, Islam gave to women rights which many other civilizations did not have. Only problem was Islam stood still, Islamic society stood still, others progressed much further. I gave you the example of Tunisia. I gave you the example actually in countries like Pakistan and India, where actually interpretation, Singapore, where more liberal interpretations are possible. I want to say this to you, whether one should be pessimistic or optimistic, it's not really possible. All that I will say is this: history does not move in a straight line. Never. History moves either in circles or in spirals. So what we've got to do is to be on the right side of history. And I take note of a few positive developments. In the last few decades, the women's movement certainly has become vocal. It is making itself heard. There's no doubt about that. I also take note of this, that actually many people are pointing out, and I also pointed out, in early Malay history, there was much greater respect for women. There was much less of a male-dominated culture than there is today. What has happened to Malay society, Muslim society, in the last 30 or 40 years is the Arabization. Malays have forgotten what it is to be a Malay. Please forgive me if I'm offending anyone, but I think Malay culture was a culture of wasatiyah, of moderation.
Yes.
But that's not the way things have become now. We are stepping on each other to become more Arabs than the Arabs. But the Arab culture has its own context. And I think Malays must return to their own. I was mentioning earlier that, for example, just one example, in the West, today a lady is Mrs. Smith, 10 years later she's Mrs. Jones, 10 years later she's Mrs. Thomas, whereas actually Malay girls will maintain, Muslim girls will maintain their family name. They don't just change their identity just because they got married to someone.
Can I have another half minute?
So I'm personally aware that there are currents and cross currents. Which one will prevail, God knows.
Can I have another half a minute to respond? Is it
So
okay?
sorry, I mean, we do have quite a few more people
Okay,
asking
then
as
it's
well,
okay.
and these guys kind of have been in line.
Then
for
it's
a bit.
okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
All right, thank you. Thank you. We'll pass it now to Andrew, who has his own words.
Andrew.
Yes. Okay. Andrew, you do have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Good morning, Professor Shad and Datuk.
I just be asking me questions. I should be asking you questions.
I just want to pick up your point on the dichotomy between public law and private law. Apologize for the train coming into the station. How did this develop in Malaysia, that the courts have taken this very narrow understanding that constitutional rights only belong in the realm of public law, but that in private relationships, individuals and corporations are free to violate that, and that's why you get Beatrice Fernandez, and then you also get is it Rafiza?
Yeah, that's right.
Shima. Interestingly, Malaysian Airlines and Air Asia on stewardesses. How do we break this dichotomy? How do we dismantle this barrier and encourage our courts to take a more progressive understanding and interpretation of fundamental liberties that should apply in all spheres of human endeavor in Malaysia?
Actually, I want to know what why some judges took that stand. There are judges and there are judges. There are all types of judges. If the judge who wrote the judgment here had looked at in India courts will even issue habeas corpus against a father who was preventing his daughter from getting married to someone of her choice. The writ of habeas corpus is generally regarded as something you use against the police for unlawful detention. In India, there are cases. In the USA, there are cases where actually a child of age said, it's my freedom. You can't stop me. Even in the matter of religion, in the USA, the courts have said, it's not age 18 that matters. it is the age of discretion. If the child is of the age of discretion, the child must have freedom of religion. So when it comes to liberty, when it comes to freedom of religion, the courts are generally quite receptive in other countries. I don't know why this particular judge made that decision. As far as I'm concerned, it's an error of jurisprudence. If there is a Gurund norm, a highest rule, which the Constitution is, it regulates everything in society. It regulates clubs, political parties, it regulates a contract. So a contract between you and me, Andrew, I would look at it this way. It's a piece of delegated legislation under the Contracts Act. The Contracts Act, in turn, is under the Constitution. And by the way, may I also point out, Islamic jurisprudence will not support a separation between public law and private law. If there is a supreme law, as there is, it applies everywhere. It applies in the home. It applies outside the home. I can't go back home to my wife and say to my wife, hey, in our house, the Sharia doesn't apply. How can that be so? So I think the approach in this Beatrice Fernandez case were both un-Islamic and was a serious error of jurisprudence. It was also in disregard of wholesome approaches in countries like India. And to me, really, Andrew, it doesn't make sense. How can one say that Constitution applies only in the public sector? What about slavery? What about the right to property? Surely in my workplace, I still have a right to property, even though it's a private sector. Another reason I have found this decision extremely objectionable is that Malaysian airline system was held to be private sector. Now, come on, that requires a willing suspension of disbelief. Though it is, I know, a company, but its personnel are appointed by the government of the day. The government pumps not a few million, billion ringgit every few decades into the, so it is, at best it is a GLC or a Quango. It is not a private sector. What is important is that there is a public element. I'm prepared to accept that there may be some areas where a purely private relationship may exist. For example, the cook I want to have in my house. Maybe I can choose in terms of religion or race or gender. But when it comes to running a restaurant, then there's a public element. And I think no gender or race or religious discrimination should be allowed. Thank you.
Just due to interest of time. Thanks again, Andrew. We do have Intan now but we did have, okay, sorry, yeah, because Bina has been waiting since the start and we're gonna have her take the floor. Bina, yes, can you hear us? I mean, are you connected? Yes. Okay. Also, just as a heads up, if you do want to speak, please speak a bit louder because due to our sound system right now, the speaker's a bit far.
Last time they were typing the questions.
No, we have 16. Yeah, very like.
Then maybe the questions could be passed to me after the session ends. I will reply to them by email.
That's
that
possible.
possible?
No, that's great. Hold on, is Bina? Can you connect? Because but her mic and everything is on. Oh, she cannot connect. Okay. Okay. We'll entertain right now the top question, which I think is a pretty good one. Great apologies because we didn't know it will run this long. Marina Mahathir asked regarding quotas as crutches. It's a false. I'm reading this off. This is a false equation. Men have had quotas all this time at 100% or at the very least 90% quotas. Why are these not considered crutches as well? Quality is not always considered when it comes to men. Our male MPs are a case in point.
I think that's quite obvious that women are suffering massive cultural, religious discrimination in virtually every sector, especially the religious sector. I myself gave the statistics that there are only 14% MPs in the Dewan Raj out of 222. I think the position in the Senate is even worse. Yes, indeed, this discrimination is there. It is because of this perception, wrong perception, that women are emotional and men are rational. This dichotomy between rationality. And I don't agree with that at all. For every one emotional women, I can point out to you 1.5 emotional men. I think emotions are common to both. It's how we express. Perhaps women express it slightly differently, and men express it differently. But so I don't really have an answer to this. There is no quota, of course, for men, as far as I know, legally. But obviously, it operates sociologically. The law is what happens, not what the book says, but what happens in reality. So, in reality, yes, what is happening is that most of the jobs are cornered, except those jobs where the pay is lesser. And then the women are in a majority. Nursing is a good example. Or teaching profession. Teachers, women are very well represented, yeah, and teachers don't get the best of salary. Eh?
And I'm going to segue into this with a question from, or a statement, I guess, from Yanita. She said that on the point of male psychology and the law, and your point with how male emotions are, it would seem that even law is subliminally focused on maintaining that so-called homeostasis of traditionally determined family systems. Would you agree? What do you think about that?
Oh, yeah. I think the law reflects the assumptions, some of them totally unfounded, of the lawmakers. And may I please point out to you, lawmakers are a very small group of elite people. We think Parliament makes the law. That's a very nice myth. The law is made by a small band of draftsmen or draftswomen in the Pejabat Program Nagara. So yes, I think their assumptions clearly come into the picture. I have been involved in some law drafting, and I want to say this to you. The biggest moral dilemma in drafting law is this, that you want the law to see the light of the day. To see the light of the day, you have to compromise. You have to compromise on gender issues. You have to compromise on other human rights issues. You have to compromise with the police. You have to compromise with the business community, because you want the law to go through. The first draft and the final draft are unrecognizable. So yes, I agree with you. Assumptions do play a role, but Parliament is more sinned against than sinning, in the sense that actually it's not really the fault of Parliament. It's the ministry and the ministry officials and the Pejabat Program Nagara who are basically filled with people who have not been sensitized enough on the movements, the new movements of the time. I think this is something in every society it happens. For example, environmentalism is a new issue. Our lawmakers are not sensitive to that. So I'm all with you. There is a lot of male psychology in many of these assumptions. Let me put it to you philosophically. We are all encapsulated. ENCAPSU. We all live in a capsule of time, of space, of territory, of religion, race, all of us. And it takes a whole lifetime actually to liberate yourself. What is necessary is a respectful, free discussion. And that's what is lacking in this country. If there were, I'm not saying we are full of bad people, no, not at all. We are full of people who are encapsulated, who have not been exposed to different views. I want to tell you my own personal experience at the University of Malaya seminar. I was talking about equal treatment or separate treatment. And there was one lady who objected to separate treatment. She said, give examples. And I said, toilets. She said, well, no, even toilets can be unisex. She pointed out many places where there are unisex toilets. I said, all right, if you are comfortable with it, fine. Then she said, give some more examples. I said, maternity leave. Oh, she got very angry with me. She said, are you implying that taking care of children is only the duty of women? There should be paternity leave as well. So she corrected me, and I stand corrected, that actually even men must take paternity leave to stay back home and take care of the children. Certainly, perhaps not in the first few weeks necessarily. First few weeks should definitely be for the woman, because she has gone through a life and death experience. A childbirth is no joke. But men should. So I was definitely encapsulated, prejudiced, looking at things insufficiently. We are all encapsulated. There's no shame in admitting that we are all biased in some respect or the other. Our perspectives are narrow. We're all frogs under a coconut shell. What is important is actually a respectful, free discussion. In this country, what happens is this: when you disagree with a view, you don't question the view. Instead, you question the person. So it's not the message; it's the messenger that is humiliated. And I think we have to change that.
I think unfortunately, due to the interest of time, we've actually gone 15 minutes over time. I do apologize for not being able to reach all of them, Ethan, as well. I'm very sorry. We could try, perhaps, we can reply or have something in response to the overwhelming amount of questions. And yeah, we'll take that on record. Don't worry. We haven't forgotten.
Isa, can I ask you? So would I be able to have these questions?
Oh yes, I've just.
Then I'll be able to answer. But I'm sorry, I can't do it tonight. I have another webinar tomorrow. So I'll do it on Saturday night. I promise you, I'll sit down and I'll try to answer. I may not be able to answer. I'll try to answer. Saturday night, I'll try.
Hello, everybody. Let me just jump in. Prof has so many things on his plate, so he will try to answer the questions forwarded. Okay, from Saturday onwards. So yeah, because I know, because we have got a lot of deadlines and all this to also do. Okay, back to you, Dr. Juita.
Thank you for Prof. Shad for the offer to sacrifice your Saturday night to answering all of our burning questions. Thank you so much again for your time, for your energy, and for your very inspiring, thought-provoking messages. We look forward to your wisdom and to your insights the next time around. I'm very inspired, and I feel that a lot of people out there are also very much inspired by your insights today. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again soon here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend.